Okay, I think we're live. Anyway, thank you everyone for attending. This is the fourth installment of the New Center's series of double bill public lectures. This one's titled Cosmo Gymnastics. So I'm just going to introduce myself really quickly. My name is Liam Sibari. I'm a Belgium-based researcher and artist. Oops, moment, excuse me. Yeah, sorry, there was some feedback, I guess. Anyway, excuse me. Yeah, so I'm a Belgium-based researcher and artist from Beirut, Lebanon. In addition to organizing and moderating this series of double bill lectures, I also participated as a lecturer initial installment. Um, I did a lecture called Dissonant Unity. It was largely about heritage. I've also done some other work with the New Center. I wrote two articles for Triple Ampersand for our basically publication platform. They were largely works in aesthetics, which comment on and build on the work of my former professor, Faiz Shalabi. So just to keep it brief, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a short introductory text, then I'm going to introduce our two speakers and their lectures. Second, excuse me. Excuse me just a moment. Okay, so when we speak of materiality, we often think of sort of objects, be they planets or technological devices or liquids or organs or people or animals. And though in some sense we're correct in referring to them as such, I think maybe a sort of more accurate or more specific articulation of that would be the corporal, not merely the material. Perhaps we can talk about them as material bodies, things which have sort of they're anatomical, they have very defined sort of borders, and but they do still function primarily on this sort of material axis, shall we say. I think there's a genus, shall we say, of the material which is indispensable to understanding what it is. For example, is gravity material? I mean, yes, but it sort of doesn't have a body. Is sound material? I would say something sort of similar that it is, but it perhaps has no body. And so I think what we're going to talk about tonight basically are forces, shall we say, rather than bodies or material objects. Okay. Again, just going to introduce the speakers very quickly, and then we can get started, basically. Okay, Carl Olsson is a writer and theorist working with histories and philosophies of science and spatial theory. His work touches on the human self-image, different concepts of freedom in nature, and transcendental philosophy. Carl recently completed a PhD in human geography at Newcastle University. He's written for Urbanomic, Shum, and different geography journals, yeah, and edited volumes. He has a seminar with the New Center coming up on January 12th, 2025. It's called The Geographers That Ate Themselves. The seminar will examine the idea of losing oneself to space, taking a cue from Roger Calwa, excuse, I probably butchered that name, but Roger Calwa's speculations about a deep-rooted temptation of all beings to recede into a generic background. Again, it begins on January 12th, 2025. It's called The Geographers That Ate Themselves. Okay, tonight, Olsson's lecture will examine how modern gymnastics embodies a quest to overcome Earth's gravitational constraints, linking this to broader philosophical and evolutionary discussions. Addressing historical changes in human posture and anatomy, Olsson will suggest that our increasing reliance on Earth's gravity signifies a reduction in freedom. Maria Jesus Maury is an artist and researcher, BA in Performing Arts at Pontificia Universidad Católica del Peru, and a certificate student uh, at the at the New Center. I'm sorry, excuse me, at the Arts and Curatorial Practice Program of the New Center for Research. The New Center. Her work often explores immersive design strategies, that highlight collective bonds through different scales, with resonance as their central axis. Maria's lecture will focus on how the craft of the sonorous in Andean land, displaced by colonization and forgotten by modernization, has been creating syncretic styles moved by an interconnection to the cosmotechnics of sound and its relationship to humans. So basically, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll address them towards the end of this lecture. Anyway, I'd like to give the mic and the screen to Carl. So Carl, please take it away.
Thank you very much. Give me 1 second here. Okay, something like that probably works. And okay. Yeah, so thank you, Liam. My name, as clear when I was Carl Olsson, and basically today I'm going to talk about some work that I've been doing over the past year or so that has to do with gymnastics, broadly defined, and trying to kind of contextualize that as a work against the planet. We'll come to that in a second. I think that maybe not everyone, but I think that some people that have ever visited a gym or kind of been involved in any kind of body weight exercise or training, or perhaps just have had a grandmother kind of call you a little monkey or something like this when you climbed when you were a child, have kind of heard something like it, kind of had this idea of returning to an older variation of basically monkeyhood, where our ancestors were somehow freer, and it's a kind of some strange version of the myth of the noble savage. I'm not really going to kind of advocate for this myth today, but I'm going to kind of investigate it as a kind of and reconstruct a unconscious philosophy of gymnastics in order to think a little bit about, quite informally, about where this idea might come from, and also what kind of implications it might have that are a bit more philosophically serious. We might say, for seeing ourselves in the environment, and for practical philosophy, a struggle for freedom that is perhaps similar to the terms we might associate with practical philosophy otherwise, like ethics and politics. The kind of the starting point for this slightly more philosophical point of view, I want to give some, let's call it, background kind of scaffolds for us, and then sort of come back to gymnastics and illustrate a little bit what I'm talking about. But a basic question here is, what does freedom mean? And an account that has sort of come out recently in the philosophy of biology has been talking about kind of freedom as a matter of emancipation from the environment, or organism level autonomy, which is usually perhaps divided into it's a synthetic concept of interactive and constitutive dimensions. Essentially, in a constitutive dimension of autonomy is basically the degree to kind of has to do with shielding from the environment, so having skins and organs that pump blood or sort of maintain osmolarity, or sort of the salination levels of the blood, such as kidneys. And whereas interactive autonomy has more to do with limbs and sort of grasping at things and being able to put them into your mouth so that you can actually ingest them. Autonomy in this sense has been described by philosophers like Alvaro Moreno and Matteo Mossio as a way to almost define life. Any kind of living organism has a degree of autonomy from its environment. What's interesting about it is that it's in principle kind of measurable. So we might, for instance, surmise that I am more free or more emancipated from my environment than, say, a sea cucumber. But it's not so. It's quite difficult to measure in a way because it is a multidimensional concept. Am I more or less autonomous than a dog, for instance? Suddenly, it's not so straightforward. Another philosopher, Bernd Rossenbroich, for instance, whose book I also have on the screen here. I would recommend both of these books, by the way. He tries to kind of introduce autonomy as a solution to direction in evolution, talking about kind of large scale kind of the transitions where it seems that animal life has become a bit more complex or more different, or on its account kind of more autonomous over time, where there is sort of the average or kind of perhaps the most autonomous animal has become more autonomous, freer from the environment. And this is kind of the theme that I'm going to be talking about today in relationship to gymnastics. And to this, I've kind of constructed a kind of mock concept of postural modernity to try to make sense of why would any sort of thinker have us return to a past environment of sort of where we are somewhat freer and can climb, kind of cling in the trees and sort of swing from branch to branch or something like this, or which perhaps is operationalized through doing very sort of impressive body weight feats such as, well, pull-ups and more backflips and other kind of saltomortals, as they might be called in proper gymnastics. Well, I'm sure everyone has seen this picture, which is, I mean, stupid. Nevertheless, I think it sort of there's something to it in terms of reading it backwards to try to understand what the sort of unconscious philosophy of gymnastics might be saying, in the sense of there's a belief somehow that our ancestors, kind of Therian, kind of primate ancestors, are more freer than kind of contemporary human beings in the sense, and that there is sort of some form of ongoing regression. One might perhaps think of how we have gone from, in a very sort of lazy sketch, hunter-gatherer societies to, on a large scale, to farming societies, to kind of the Industrial Revolution, and suddenly everyone is sort of sitting on a bench, and not everyone, but many people are, and kind of working. And so there has been although of course not universal or equally kind of distributed in the world, but nevertheless a kind of a moving edge where some sections of society has kind of regressed. And this seems to be an idea that kind of emerges regressed in terms of their autonomy. And this is an idea that emerges in early kind of accounts of gymnastics in Europe in the 18th century, and then into the 19th century when it becomes institutionalized. So there are people like one figure, Gudsmuth, sort of was quite early with this, and then a bit more the Swedish gymnastics teacher, Per-Henrik Ling, had a similar idea that it's possible to kind of recreate a freer population. Working in Swedish context, he kind of wanted to have a male population in particular that was kind of stoic, literally Viking-like, and so on. So at certain points in kind of the history of gymnastics thought and kind of in education, this is an idea that kind of pops up, that there's the myth of the noble savage, which is basically that so-called primitive or older sort of situations in populations would be somehow freer in this context. But also it seems that this kind of idea also exists on a much, much grander scale, with this return to something that is kind of evolutionarily very, very distant in time. So what are they actually talking about here in this situation? When they talk about kind of freedom, since autonomy is essentially a multidimensional concept, it has to be kind of operationalized towards something. And the way to kind of measure it and to understand it is presumably through breaking it up a little bit. And in any kind of historical narrative here, we might have to sort of, if we're interested in freedom as precisely a kind of a practical problem in this sense, we presumably have to kind of break it up and sort of put it in terms of in relationship to something else. Another kind of line that is sometimes said is that a gymnast or an athlete or a sort of an acrobat performs a gravity-defying move. And of course, this is not really true, but it might very well be true that they are performing an Earth-defying move. Since a planet at the end of the day is not really held together by gravity in any direct sense, rather it's the influence on the kind of the force of gravity, even in a Newtonian physics. It is a mass kind of acting meaningfully on itself. So as to say, sorry, I'm going to come back to that, falling into itself from every direction. So any kind of gravity, what we might call a gravity-defying move, is really a kind of an anti-planetary activity. Of course, this is perhaps a very obvious point to make. At the same time, I think we're going to see that it has some quite interesting sort of heuristic implications for not only understanding gymnastics here as kind of something that is tethered to this sort of dimension of autonomy, or this sort of force, but also for understanding kind of the history of life. It becomes that sort of gymnastics, it becomes a sort of tool for inquiring into how life turns itself over against its environment. It sets itself apart from different aspects and different sort of aspects of its environment. And I have previously talked in an article called Peak Phase about sort of something that we might call a planetary niche hypothesis, which would be that sort of an aspect of sort of what's on the planet that covers literally everything of the planet, and is going to kind of interact with you wherever you are. So I'm not talking about here. I would not be talking about kind of trees or sort of how. Whether you're walking in mud or something, but nevertheless, no matter where you are on the planet, kind of per definition, you're going to kind of be interacting with the planet as planets via in the kind of the medium of gravity. I should say that sort of some of this perspective is coming from Lukáš Likavič's kind of article Another Earth, and published last year, I think, that sort of talks about the astronomical concept of the planet. Similar perspectives have come from Bronislaw Sierczynski and also Deepa Chakrabarty. So this is kind of an idea. All of this kind of what I'm talking about kind of maps onto some recent work in the environmental humanities that is trying to think about planetary as planet, kind of the planet as planet. So too for the Earth in this context, right? We are affected by it, no matter where we are. But of course, we might ask then, is this always the case? Because it seems that also that at different scales or in different sizes, life kind of fights against or is dominated by different forces. For instance, for very small animals, in the flying in the air, of course, gravity is a certain constraint, but also for a tiny fly, the electrostatic force is something that kind of plays a huge role in its life and its ability to kind of cling to a wall or to the roof. And at even smaller scales, gravity also isn't such a big part of life's kind of struggle to kind of move around and to comport itself to its outside. What's interesting about this is, of course, that as a result of this, I think one can literally say that kind of the history of the life is something that has passed through a kind of a gradient of constraints and different forces that constrain it. And insofar as the planet is its gravity, it is not until sort of life becomes large enough that the planet in a kind of proto-epistemic relationship. So when, now I don't have any data on sort of what exact scale this might be, but of course it's quite small. But at a certain point, sort of where actually the planet, through the force of gravity, begins interacting with it in a meaningful way. And I think this is quite an interesting idea, because suddenly it becomes then a matter of kind of negotiating through various environments. And I'm going to come back to this to give it a little bit more formal treatment in a bit. But through kind of building various environments and through kind of, basically evolution, finding ways to kind of negotiate these planetary constraints by testing out different environments in the struggle for some kind of autonomy. For instance, and much of this idea is kind of comes, for instance, in from the work, this short article by JBS Haldane on being the right size, which I also would kind of strongly recommend to read, because it's quite fun, even though it ends with a weird kind of parallel on the right size of social organizations, and I can try to kind of pick out what's problematic about that. But that's kind of an aside. In any case, there are other sort of constraints that make that kind of sit around, that surround life's struggle against gravity, if we choose to kind of laser focus on that. For instance, what's known as Galileo's square cube law is sort of simply the fact that volume increases faster than surface area when you go up in size. It presents kind of a huge problem, because for the simple reason that sort of once the same kind of design principles that function at a small size don't necessarily function at a large size, which is why Haldane argues that sort of large animals don't really look like small ones. And for the simple reason that they would kind of collapse under their own weight, or the kind of most insects, insects and other kind of land-living arthropods breathe through kind of basically small holes, and they are kind of oxygen diffused in their bodies. This doesn't work at a larger scale, because literally it's kind of too far for oxygen to kind of be diffused in this way, which is why we have the oxygen transportation systems we have. Well, it's not why, but which is why some kind of other system is required and had to be evolved for us to kind of be able to get to the size that we are, i.e. lungs and the kind of the blood circulation system. Similarly, in the context of, and as you can see now, I'm building kind of the background for understanding why gymnastics is a sort of an anti-planetary practice, and some of the constraints that kind of surround it. Similarly, there's a question of kind of lever arms for performing certain movements. It becomes very kind of difficult if you're a taller person, because physics is going to limit you essentially. So size matters quite a bit in when we're dealing with sort of again turning against the planet. And for instance, this is also from Haldane's point by Haldane. That's kind of funny that proportional giants kind of suck. A giant human being like someone who's 50 feet tall would probably just not be able to move, would collapse under their own weight, because the sheer kind of volume of the muscles that would be required to move bones that are thick enough to support themselves would kind of be too weak, or in fact, even the bones would at a certain level just collapse under their own weight. So there are hard limits to how large we can be essentially on the planet, and which brings to mind questions about how weird dinosaurs kind of were. Though, of course, different times probably contains kind of different environmental variables, which is another point I'm coming back to. Yes. So with all this said, it appears to be the case that gymnastics then is a kind of practical philosophy, a way to to perform against gravity and to explore the frontiers of freedom in a way that harkens back to and sort of seizes on the observations that some of the kind of the ancestors of the human species were freer or sort of more did a better job in this very specific respect. So it's like a anti-planet maxing idea that goes into gymnastics and kind of animates it from the ground up. Importantly, of course, this is not to say that it's that being a good gymnast is to be conflated with it being good per se. Indeed, my very point is that it's a different branch of practical philosophy than kind of ethics as altogether. It has it's kind of the struggle for emancipation from the environment and or even specific aspects of the environment is something that can be chosen to be engaged in, and then it's sort of you're going to come up against essentially natural limits or that have a seemingly normative structure if you choose to negotiate against them. So in this way, it is a kind of a teleological conduct. You turn the appearance of a kind of goal directedness, teleonomy, and even in kind of in evolutionary terms, that sort of it seems that life over time maybe has become kind of pushed the frontiers of autonomy on a very grand scale, and then you sort of turn this into through a kind of a rationalizing project. It is turned into a kind of a way to reshape the human body to kind of jump onto this trend and continue it. Which is simply what goes into the kind of the statement that, oh, I want to swing like the trees, like a monkey, or something like it. So I'm going to show you a couple of clips of kind of good interesting gymnastics performances. And this is Olga Korbut in the 1970s, I think, at the Olympics. And more recently, there is, of course, Simone Biles, who is essentially perhaps one of, yeah, and then one more of sorry, I forgot what this is, but it's performing from men's athletic gymnastics, performing the cross on the rings. And I think this is some kind of world record. In any case, what I want to say with this is that sort of what's interesting about kind of competitive gymnastics is that it becomes a way of essentially benchmarking autonomy. Because again, insofar as autonomy, even sort of when it's broken down into a single dimension, there's a kind of a measurement problem. How do I know that sort of, or how would kind of the gymnast philosopher know that one is more free than the other? One answer seems to be that kind of the hyper-rationalization of the competitive form solves this problem by kind of making it scoreable. Which is an interesting idea that you can sort of measure it via some kind of proxy, which of course has the potential consequence that people would start kind of training for the proxy rather than true autonomy. But as I think we can tell by now, this is kind of remember I'm using gymnastics here as a kind of a tool to make a narrative rather than we shouldn't take it too seriously, I think. And if one wants to kind of engage in these practices oneself, there are a range of different sort of manuals. There's Stephen Lowe's Overcoming Gravity that proposes kind of a programmatic or systematic approach to gymnastics, for grown-ups. So I'm going to sort of then read a little bit from an essay I've written on this that remains unpublished. recapitulation as practice, to talk about precisely the return to the attempt to reactivate something from the past in the present, as an almost stoic idea. So, and of course, one of the sort of the great central points of kind of stoicism was to act in accordance with nature, whatever that might mean. Any number of things. Nature contains many variables, and acting in accordance with one can entail kind of directly renouncing one or several others. Liberty and acquiescence to nature can only be defined relative to a particular context. The gymnast's goal is to turn the human animal back to the bleeding edge of the past, even if it is only done piecemeal, as a small refuge against postural modernity. If the trend towards postural autonomy from the planet peaked with some unknown tree-dwelling ancestor, it has since turned, and we are, by and large, creeping our way back to a state of relatively unfree movement perpendicular to the planet. The gymnast responds by promising basically to transform the human being into an anti-planetary aspirant for the Earth to reckon with. Gymnastics, in the broad sense, is that opposition to the planet is an area at the kind of the nexus or intersection of practical philosophy and deep biological history. From this perspective, which raises the question of sort of how is practical recapitulation connected to the past? So if the present exists as a kind of an echo of the past, the gymnast concludes that or tacitly concludes, I suppose, that we currently live in a present dominated by a horizontal plane of motion. It is in this sense that postural modernity is an age of human worms. On the philosophically minded gymnast's part, this is no kind of derisory moral judgment, but a reflection of the kind of the brute fact that every man is a living sausage or worm in its terrestrial setting. Worms move perpendicular to gravity. They slide and crawl in general alignment with the strata of the earth, in the water, through the soil, and indeed at the very bottom of the atmosphere, such as we do. And I mean, then there are sort of several accounts of this kind of recapitulation of sort of trying to reawaken something from the past. Consider, for instance, the 1980s film by Ken Russell, Altered States, where a man basically takes some drugs and becomes a monkey, literally. So and this is basically what I'm saying, that it seems sort of some early theorists of gymnastics, but also sort of in this kind of casual sense that sometimes pops up in popular discourse, is what some people are trying to do. Of course, not literally changing their body, but in terms of performance, trying to achieve something that kind of our direct ancestors would be capable of, but we are not. There's a sense of loss, perhaps, a deep conservatism that is rooted in this discipline. And perhaps gymnasts are essentially furs without suits. There's I'm going to see if I can link this in the chat later, but there's an interesting idea kind of that people who engage in kind of the very kind of subculture are trying to kind of harken back to a time when we had considerably more hair and fur than we do now. And of course, in this sense, if this is so, then gymnastics would be a way of doing this kind of on a level of performance rather than on appearance, in terms of appearance. And I guess this kind of old meme might, summarize the unconscious philosophy of gymnastics, which leads to this perhaps more interesting takeaway about planetarity and autonomy. Reject humanity and return to monkey. Okay, to try to wrap this up a little bit, or at least moving in that direction, we might imagine that there is a kind of a calculus of escape, a calculus of freedom or emancipation. Because insofar as different environments kind of modulate planetary forces, the situation, for instance, in the ocean, where we were, our very far off ancestors were supported by kind of the entire water pillar and as a kind of to minimize the force of gravity, or kind of the effects of the force of gravity on them. Presents a kind of a completely different environment than the surface of terrestrial space, where we are kind of where we moved on to. But each environment, of course, comes with its own limitations too. For instance, it might be much more difficult to kind of there seems to be sort of some evolutionary reasons that sort of there aren't so many things with grasping thumbs or so on in the sea. So there's this kind of any migration to a new environment seems to be a profound gamble in the history of freedom, where at any point it's possible to kind of, oh, we might lose a little bit of course no one thinks this, but let's pretend this is the case. We might lose a little bit of our autonomy and be a bit more bound to this new environment, but perhaps something else will come from it, a dice throw, if you will. And all of this is a kind of a two-sided game of trying to, on the one hand, maximize autonomy in the given environment, but also via the capacities of the body. Whereas on the other hand, it's the game of finding an environment that can, in the long run, for anyone who plays the game of emancipation, in the long run can support a higher degree of freedom. And in this way, autonomy from the planet really is the domain of practical philosophy, that there are these two sort of ways one can kind of, these two knobs one can turn, or these different levers one can pull. Hitting two moving targets, a changing environment and a changing kind of body in these histories. And we might then compare if gymnastics is a kind of conservatism of returning backwards in a way, returning to by looking to life history to find inspiration for the future. We might perhaps compare it to what might be called the cetacean solution of literally jumping back into the ocean that presents an environment that is in some ways that facilitates freedom in a completely different way, but perhaps has a lower ceiling in certain, at least within, if we're talking about freedom from the planet as such here. There might be any other benefits, but that is not our game tonight. So what amounts to kind of giving up on the game and deciding to swim freely. So like this. Similar kind of situation. But of course, then in the maybe some of you have this, I think is one of the last slides, have been kind of thinking about where I'm going with all this, and ultimately I think it's a question of trying to think about technological practices also in terms of the prospect of literally kind of leaving Earth behind as a gamble to kind of see this through the lens of the history of autonomy, where the solution would simply be to kind of leave gravity altogether, or kind of Earth's gravitational influence on us, and to do something elsewhere completely different. Similarly to a major environmental transition, such as migrating onto land from the oceans. So this is the sort of how does this kind of story about gymnastics and the conservative option of the gymnast and the whale help contextualize grandiose ambitions of spaceflight and so on, or might it actually make these look more promising or outright ridiculous? I don't know. This is very much ongoing work, so to say. So I guess the tension I've been trying to draw here is the one between a radical escapism versus a sort of profound conservatism of trying to return to something that was. With this, essentially, I'm going to end. I'm just going to say a couple of closing words. That is sort of the problem that is animating all of this little, this mini narrative I had here today, is essentially the problem of space, the problem of the environment. How it seems that animal life, at the very least, continuously struggles against some sort of possibility of relapsing into a state of being dominated by external forces or that constrain us. And of course, we are talking in relatives here. Autonomy is always relative. But what I'm also going to do in the seminar that I'm teaching in January is to look at this, how basically knowledge about space and cognitive technologies in a very grand scheme of things, such as geographical knowledge, intervene in similar struggles against the external world, and what happens when certain attempts fail, when we fall from the tree we're climbing, or from the pull-up bar we're trying to get on top of, and then fall down, and what happens then. So that's essentially it, and I very much so please stay and listen to Maria's lecture, which I think will be really, really exciting. I personally look forward to it, so thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Carl. That was really excellent. I have a lot of questions and a lot of thoughts, but for now, I'm going to pass it to Maria, and maybe we can have time for questions after. So thank you again, Carl. Maria, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Carl. That was an amazing and very entertaining lecture. I was expecting that Return to Monkey meme, so I'm very pleased it happened. Thank you, Liam. Thank you to the center for this opportunity. I'm gonna present now to I'm in the screen, so I hope it shows correctly. Oh, wait a second. And also I need to do this. Okay. Now this should work. Please let me know if you see any artifacts or whatever. Now, is it okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, thank you. So hi again. My name is Maria Jesús Maury. Please don't expect too much. I'm still yeah, I am just finishing this program, postgraduate program, and I certainly have a lot of things I wish I could cover, but that maybe because of my experience, maybe because of the time, probably won't be able to do so. But regardless, my talk is about many things that I have been gathering around some notions of basically, to put it simply, concepts. Cosmotechnics, what that word means for Andean, Peruvian Andean music arts, and what sort of possibilities does it open to reinterpret our because I'm Peruvian too, arts as through those lenses, to think the question of technology seriously, and to reinterpret a lot of what the art that has been happening here through those lenses. So I'm gonna now try to follow what I've written. Here. Okay, first, the abstract that I sent was incomplete, and I think that it's important that I start by acknowledging sort of the personal insight from which this whole ensemble of things like comes to be. So I, Maria, I'm an artist whose material identity has been lost to time and space, and that's the point of departure for this conglomerate of sorts. So then we can talk about, or rather, because of this, we can talk about the craft of the sonorous in Andean music, in Andean arts, has been displaced by colonization, has been forgotten by modernization, we claim, and thus or still has been proliferating in syncretic styles that are moved by inner connection to a local cosmotechnics of sound. That is our speculation. And so by amplifying the threads that make up huayno sound from the 70s, which is Siempre, recordaré, or I Will Always Remember You by Flor Pucarina, I want to weave a myth that tells a story of the Andean electronic. This is still a work in progress, and I don't think I'm going to be able to reach the point of the myth per se. And now I've remembered something I forgot to put, but hopefully I'll be able to do it without that. But I still want to take all of this journey, hopefully, and to gain some more insights from you. And yeah, so first, I don't need to go through the overview, maybe yes. So as I stated, I am going to first talk about a bit about what I call uprooted. I hope that's the correct translation, the correct word, cultural identity that I have as an artist. And from there, I'm going to talk about some issues that branch out from that, which is basically I am a musician, I am a composer. So the issue of music technology and progress, that those are narratives from the Western point of view, and what do they entail, mean, and constrain within the global South artistic practices, and specifically music practices. And then I'm gonna sort of make a review of Huay's concept of techno-diversity and how that is a strategy that can open a pluralization of histories and thus a pluralization of techniques and also of legitimization, we should say, of various different crafts and arts, especially local South indigenous arts. Then I'm going to make a little bit of a divergence, or rather tangent to talk about or mention some things about Andean cosmology, which is, let's say, the most recent part of my research now, so as to then have a second part in which I talk more specifically about popular recorded music as a globalizing force, which is something I find partially in Anya Carrier's work on dialectic of pop, but it's also sort of my postulate or my hypothesis of what pop is now, is coming to be. And then I'm going to localize that in Peru and talk a bit about its relationship to these topics. And then I'm going to land on the case that I'm going to try to explain today, which is Flor Pucarina, the Andean musical stars of the 70s and 80s, and the song in itself. And hopefully mythology or myth for Andean cosmotechnics. So, first, this is a map of Peru, which has been a bit distorted. I shall begin finally by asking for a bit of, I guess, forgiveness, since this talk we have as a center of discussion my condition of existence as an artistic and cultural subject, as an interrogation of what is, from a standpoint of politico-aesthetic responsibility, the art that I want and can do. The interrogation of my will to create is derived from a deep feeling of uprootedness. I come from a city, Lima, which is built on top of the devastation of many other territories and indigenous people. At the same time, I have a vague and generationally severed connection to such indigenous communities, their resistances, and their cultures. From such a standpoint, I certainly can't find a place for an authentic voice, or rather, the current discourses for determining what a legitimate voice is in art, and more specifically, music and sound art. I find that those current discourses don't seem to resonate with me, and for me, they seem to lack a congregational. They seem to be segregational, actually, and they don't seem to be to have a horizontal understanding of what music is and can be. Liam mentioned this, but basically my place of initiation is from the convergence of art and technology. And this place in the global south, and specifically in the artistic circles of Peru, seems to be a controversial one. On the one side, there are artists who deem technology as a corrupting force, and often reduce this vast terrain to a force of globalization and late capitalism alienation or exploitation. On the other side, technology symbolizes progress and in turn renders Latin American technical practices as always incomplete, always behind, and lacking a true and legitimate use of the potential of technology as it is now. There is often this saying of the misuse of some technical some technical apparatuses or some technical dispositives. While these positions of initiation are not absolute, they definitely have shaped both critique and practice. For example, I didn't get to have the images of all what I wanted to share there, but for example, here is this book, which is Este futuro es otro futuro, or This Future is Another Future by José Ignacio López Ramírez Gaston, which is a book about the sub-development or underdevelopment actually of electronic music in Peru, and that sort of view, for example, is a radical account of Peruvian music's relation to technology as one that hasn't properly started yet, as he puts it. So these views continue to proliferate, and in that academic space, I find it urgent to draw a different horizon of understanding of what music and its relationship to technology, local music in its relation to technology is or can be. So this talk is an exploration as well as a root of what has been my answer to this conundrum in the form of both a perspective and as well as a retrospective speculation, I hope. So, first, music technology and the issue of progress. Here we have two images. We have what would be ancient practices or pre-colonization sort of practices of music in Peru. Here there are some, I don't remember the name in English, but in Spanish is, no, I don't remember the name either. Like women from the curve, basically, playing this drum which is called tinja. And in the right we have a orquesta típica, or I don't know how to say this, orchestra, which is like basically a chamber ensemble of mostly saxophones, violins. Here we have a guitar which is not that common, and a harp which is pretty common in this central Andes of Peru. I wanted to show the difference between what we have now, which is a syncretic style, and this is like from 1926, but the format has continued, and what we sort of have as an image, but we don't have, we don't know how this sounded like. So there's a loss of what an identity of our music once was. So globalization entails a double threat of synecdochial nature, a universalized continuous temporal access, and the overrepresentation of modern technique as encompassing the whole of human techniques. Colonization and globalization set upon themselves a task to explain, to rationalize the whole world as a gravitating toward a Western teleology, one that had its priorities on the universalization as a figure of man and his mastering of the world via modern technology. And here I'm following the figure of man according to Sylvia Winter. I don't remember, I think it's, I don't remember the name of the article, I'm going to name it after. So the temporal justification of such a mission resides in the scientific notion of evolution and its distortion toward biological and cultural eugenics. Whole sonic traditions and practices were deemed as noise, unlistenable, or devilish, such as this one, the ones that were portrayed in the left, in order to expel them from the terrain of music during the process of colonization. Even when modernist experimentation with pitch and rhythm repurposed musical practices from various African musics and with Asian and Andean scales, these were still discredited as primitive or ancestral, fixed in a point in time, pre-substantiated already in the West's temporalization of the human. We can see the continuity of such framework in current musicological studies. On the one hand, there is popular music studies that often engage with modernized versions of any popular music practices in a determined region, while ethnomusicology mostly tackles music rooted in local and indigenous traditions, giving it a place and a time subsumed below practices that could dialogue with the globalized and planetary, often granted to contemporary and experimental sonic arts. This epistemological derivation for me does more harm as it excludes these practices from the actual contemporaneity they share with those other sonic worlds than to serve as a useful methodology. So, as I said a while ago, a principal concern of us in this situation is inevitably political. While in various social formations in Peru there is a constant struggling dialogue for the emergence of new different worlds and frames of reference that give large groups of marginalized, and here I'm talking about Quechua, Aymara, queer and trans people, the political and representational power that they serve. These fights then translate to our own conceptions of musical and sonorous practices. Music, as ever-present and pervasive as it is still framed by critics, academics and musicians alike around an evolutionary temporality, where European sonic arts are at the forefront. So the absence of a discussion of what does a shared present of very different and polyvalent music means for political and cultural representation is concerning, given that the discourse around it is still shaped by a colonial framework. So, in response to this, we find ourselves in the search for the enabling of a techno-diversity. Here, this is a graph from What Begins After the End of Enlightenment, if I'm not mistaken, that article from Juquay, there he proposes, again, the concept of techno-diversity. And this is one that does not take music making and sound reproduction manipulation as already universalized or already singularized, as this global axis of time suggests, but rather that these musics are formed by geographical and cosmological constraints. This is not a goal, as Huay already stresses, to object modern technology or to return to an imagined or idealized past. Instead, it is both the reappropriation of modern technologies and the recognition of the local cosmologies that shape and construct our own techniques. As such, techno-diversity enables us to perceive multiple temporalities that arise due to various histories formulated within cosmologies, as well as multiple ways of music making and sonorous worlds that live within them. Music, therefore, needs to be diversified too. Yes, as Julio Mendivil argues, we need to be against music, that is, against a univocal idea that implies a hierarchical positioning of various social practices and experiences that call themselves music. Instead, shifting the focus to a plural musics helps us recognize the conflicting yet convergent nature of human conceptions of music. And most importantly to us, the independent historical processes from which they resulted. We arrive at a similar argument of the universal within the local as deployed by Hui with techniques. There are various cosmological frameworks that enable a certain conception of music. Techniques of sounds, sonorous techniques that may or not be involved in a direct production of those sounds, but nevertheless shape and are shaped by the human understanding of the world they inhabit. So, okay, I'm really sorry, but since I'm in my house now, I'm having a. Could you give me please a minute? This is very embarrassing, but could you give me please just 1 minute?
Yes, of course, of course.
Yeah, so I think it's this. Yes. Please stay with me. Okay, I'm very sorry. Yeah, there should be no.
Yeah, you're good. I think there's one very thin one, but that one
Okay.
disappears.
Okay, now it should disappear. So, for that, for this task, part of the part of the program or part of the I want to use a word that is not task. Part of the endeavor is to research, investigate this Andean cosmology from which these sonorous practices have derived. So for this part, I wanted to just show a bit of Andean cosmology. I am mainly interested in this idea of duality slash complementarity, which is the idea that each part of the world is divided in both feminine and masculine parts, and while this seems at first sight a bit, I don't know, from the West sexist, this idea is like sort of a fractal nature in the sense that every part, every whole and every part has these both subdividing parts, both masculine and feminine, up and down, left and right, and so on and so forth. So there, this whole like this dualism, as it is called, is a dualism that is that is at the same time a relation of complementarity. So there cannot be one without the other. So here we have a graph of Pacha, which is like the basic idea of the cosmos in Andean cosmology. And we have the world above, this world, and the world below, which is Hanan Pacha, Kai Pacha, and Uku Pacha. And we have, and this world is like the now, the absolute now, if I'm not mistaken, which is like enabled via the world, the past and the future, which are both Nyampah Pacha and Hamuh Pacha, and these two enable the present. At the same time, we have the division between Hari and Warmi, which is man and woman, the division between Inti and Kia, sun and the moon, and Pachatata and Pachamama, which is Father Earth and Mother Earth. And each one of those belong to a certain horizon or level of the cosmos. This is like the space-time concept and the central pairs that are related to this whole basic cosmology. What I want to take from here is, or what I am right now interested, as I said, is this idea of thinka. And I'm going to read this. Human beings live within this dualistically conceived cosmology in Kaipacha, which is the now, between the skies and the earth. Not now, but this world. On the one hand, there is the wise man, called Yachach by the Quechuas and Yatiri by the Aymaras, who individually functions as a knowing intermediary, creates a connection through prayers and songs between humans inhabiting this world and the deities, which are in the world above. On the other hand, there are the collectively celebrated music rituals and festivals of the Indians, which create, by means of honoring and offering, a common bridge between the profane and sacral, between above and below, between growing and dying, between Pachamama, Virgin Maria, and Pachatata Tata Cruz. Just such collectively celebrated occasions are known as tinku or tinka, which in Spanish is encuentro, which in English would be encountering. And tinka is a symbolic union to express a bond of unity, distinction, and reciprocity, which represents a third whole unit formed through an interlocking principle. This new third unit, in turn, emanates power, energy, and reproduction. So what I'm interested in right now is on how this idea of complementarity, instead of negating one or the other or giving a sort of a hierarchy, search for complementarities, and as such, I think it serves or has the potential to serve as a, I'm gonna say, antidote to the hierarchization previously explained or displayed by this univocal idea of progress, and also the superposition and progression of various techniques, technologies, tools, one substituted by the other, right? So there is this idea that, and I'm probably going to talk about that after, about how these syncretic styles or these syncretic rituals and practices develop in the Andes. I'm talking about not only music, but also dance, and also the very language and the transformations that it has gone through, and various languages, not just Quechua and Aymara. There's this idea of adaptation, but also of finding new complementarities within, and I think that has the potential to serve as a way to explore and understand and conceptualize what has been done in popular artistic practices, specifically music, here in Andes of Peru. So now we move on to popular recorded music as a globalizing force. So we understand as Anyagoria pop not as a musical genre, but as recorded popular music, as proposed by Goriot. Here, more technology is explicitly foregrounded as an essential component on the production of popular music. The mode in which this technology operates in pop is via the recording and manipulation of its sounds, its sonorous matter. Treated as a sonic object, popular music is then massively distributed through the industrialization of sonic as well as visual reproduction technologies. Akin to the modern narrative of novelty and innovation, pop was idealized as the zeitgeist of the world in a process that gradually connected more parts of the world to a shared conglomerate of effects, instruments, and sounds. So pop, for me, has this planetary scale effect now, and has through recording technologies a way of also transmitting various belief systems, and also inscribing and mainly inscribing various cosmologies in dialogue, in contradiction or intentions with the Western cosmotechnics of the modern technology, this idea of framing and so on. So here I wanted to draw two ideas. First, the idea of the recording as description, which is described, I think, here by Maria. On this ontological level, the formal level of its identity, and intellectual level of the pop record. Each work is incommensurably with all others and none is subordinate, even chronologically, to any other. However, not all possible live interpretations of the song, from concert performances to improvised fireside performances at summer camps, are pop works. Ontologically speaking, in the live performance, the pop work becomes an already performed score for a new performance, which may alter the original. Although performance, embodiment, and many other unrecordable practices are also part of pop, its artistic determination, the form that materially determines its artifacts and the way in which we understand them, is rooted in the identity of work and recording. So here the basic idea is pop as an inscription. On the cultural milieu, it sort of tells a cosmological story. It encapsulates and is sent throughout the world. And the other idea is authenticity. And I think authenticity, it's an idea that puts in tension the work of pop, and also we think that it devises or it prepares the ground for an idea of mythology. There's this often, and Flor Pucarina enters into this too, idea of the myth of the artist, or the legend of such artist in another. So I wanted literally to take that too as part of the formulation. Yeah, I don't think we need to read this quote though. So, about the process of pop and technology in Peru. This process of pop wasn't linear, nor it was simultaneous, since recording technologies were distributed unequally and when made accessible were often used to highlight local conceptions of what sonically, musically represented the popular spirit of such other places outside the Western Euro-modern market of pop distribution, the Global South's popular music. In such concurrent endeavor, various discussions at local intellectuals, politicians, artists were sometimes where sometimes they had more than one role, as José María Regueros, for example, in the case of Peru. These people held over the second half of the 20th century, shaped the politics and engagement of popular music with recording technologies and their consequent artifacts, electroacoustic transformation. This can be said at the very least for the case of Latin America. So, technology, a concept strongly held by Euromodern's ideal of progress, has been interpreted as a society of dispute and new colonization by Latin American politicians and artists. As such, often innovations in electronic technologies were ignored, despised, or even prevented its access to local artists. Not only it was a suppression of technologies, it was also a suppression of the hybrid cultural expressions that it sprouted. And here this image comes into context. In 1971, President dictator of Peru, Juan Velasco Alvarado, ordered Carlos Santana, this artist here, concert in Lima to be cancelled. Santana wasn't even allowed to leave the Peruvian International Airport. This action was motivated by a political altercation between Velasco's semi-modernist leftist regime and the far-left political movement Patria Roja, Red Nation, actions to sabotage the concert, as it was seen as an event that safeguarded, quote, the interests of the oligarchy and imperialism. As such, the modern Mexican use and appropriation of sonic electronic technologies was in conflict with a highly localized and radical view of what popular music should strive for and look up to in Peru. Progress meant conflicting relationships between technology and art across Latin America. Now, where national politics were vastly critical at times with what technology and progress meant for Peru, and this often was associated with left-wing politicians and governments. Across the country, adoptions of current technologies still happened, although partially without institutional support. And I think, yes. As it turns out, some politicians did see an important value in technology and the arts, especially with recording technologies, as its use for producing archives was very valuable for the preservation of local indigenous artistic expressions. José María Arguedas was a crucial figure in institutionalizing recording technologies for the preservation and then communication of various popular musics, especially in the Andes. Here is where the first local record labels pop up, and within precarious conditions, they successfully established some of the first mass production of Peruvian popular music. Pop, here, was again born. And here we have two pictures. First of Virrey Records, which was a very popular recording house that hosted artists such as Flor Pucarina, Huascarán, and Pastorita Guaracina, if I'm not mistaken. And on the right we have our star of today, which is Flor Pucarina. So in the entering the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, we entered into what is known as the golden age of commercial huayno. And huayno, I'm sorry, I didn't explain this, is a very popular Andean genre, but it's not only from Peru, it spans across all the Andes of Latin America. And it was because of the efforts of some politicians that it gained the traction that it had during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then when it was displaced by other genres such as cumbia, chicha. So here we have I think I have this. Here we have a different use of technologies, or rather than a misunderstood use of technologies. So I wasn't able to translate this at the time, but basically what Julio Mendivil says in this article about the technology of sound and the naturalization of media in the case of Peruvian huayno is that in the 70s there were low resources usually in these recording houses, so there was a difficult of access to new technologies for the musicians, and because of that the recording sessions were often just like first takes or just whatever they could take from a couple of hours. So that was a common practice until the 80s and even to the beginning of the 90s, and that's a practice that he himself knew about. There was a sort of a tolerance for mistakes in the recordings of huayno, but that at the same time gave a bit of this flavor of authenticity because of the, let's say, live attitude of the recording, and that was and it was too enhanced by effects such as reverb, especially reverb, if I'm not mistaken, and chorus Olsson effects, which were again precarious but gave it a sound which the Andean musicians appropriated. This, of course, was deemed as a dirty sound, was deemed as a unprofessional, or as a misuse even of technology by often academics and critics that came from the Western world or were more in touch with, I don't know, what was happening in the West, in Europe, in United States. But here we want to take a different reading of that. So now we come to, which is for me the hardest part of this talk, and the last, which is the song itself. I figured that we weren't going to be able to listen to it, so I'm going to explain sort of what happens here. The song is called Siempre recordaré, or I will always remember you, and it's a song about a deceased loved one. And the reason why I chose this is a song that was released in 1977 in the LP, also called Siempre, recordaré. The reason why I chose this song is mainly because it's very subjective. It's because it has a moment of total silence, which is, I think, is Jonathan Sterner, which says this, that silence as a product, or as an absolute silence by itself, does not exist outside of the studio. So it is a clear product of the recording technology industry, and that for me made very important this track in particular. I'm not sure, I haven't revisited all the discography of Flor Pucarina to know if this is the only song where they use absolute silence, quote unquote, but that is the reason why I chose this one. It has an orquesta típica, which is a whole register of saxophones, violin, harp, and voice. That's it. And this moment of silence, which is when Flor Pucarina says, "Don't, please don't avoid me, Lord," that I can. I find it difficult to translate it now, but I can cry over this person, that I look at him deep down in silence. That is the part where she is in absolute silence, and that moved me a lot, and I wanted to make through that song a sort of reconstruction of the uses of recording technology. To be very honest, that is part which is which I'm currently at, which is to figure out, based on this relationship of reciprocity, based on this relationship of going beyond the idea of well, is a correct use of technologies, and also like the idea of Flor Pucarina as a star, which I haven't talked really that much about. Flor Pucarina is called the pharaoh of Huanca, which is like this area of the central Andes of Peru, and she's a whole different personality. There's a lot of ground to cover, which I'm unfortunately still doing. So the idea for this project is to continue with this song, which I'll probably send it to you both, Liam and Carl, which is a very expressive and precious song, and to find within this recording this very intimate expression, a testament of what is basically the completion or the beginning of such a dialogue between a marginalized, continually marginalized group of people, which is Quechuas, or Indios as they were called.
Sorry, Maria, just something small. I need to give you a 5-minute warning. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. Please
no,
go
don't
on.
worry. Like this last thing, but don't. Why is I just noticed that the numbers are messed up. But yeah, I'm about to finish. Yeah, so I lost track of that. Basically, that's the point of the research I am at. And the thing is to get to mythology framing, cosmotechnics, to get to myth, which Flor Pucarina in herself already was, but sort of to reinterpret it. And here I just have a closing example, which is from Alain Pomo Manifiesto Futurista Andino, or Andean Futurist Manifest, in which he puts these two apparently similar pictures, which is tokapo, which is a pattern from some textiles of the 16th century in Peru. And this work by Casimir Malevich, which is 4 squares. And he talks about probably a bit in the same sense as Borges when he talks about this idea of interpretation, and also Foucault, Borges and Foucault. But he tries to put it further, to go it further in a speculative direction, which is we don't have, and I mentioned this idea of this image of the tinjas of these drums. We don't have like a true record of what this music, this art, this cosmology sounded or was like. We have records that are already syncretized. We have that have already been transmitted, have already been passed through various, mainly Western transformations. And there's a resistance there, of course, but there's also part of the imagination that needs to be reintroduced here. And this homologous relationship between these two vastly different points of origin that sort of get into the same work is there to show the possibility of, I'm going to say reinserting, but it's not actually the right word, but rather not reinserting, but giving the value that it deserves, and it is like Andean arts, Andean techniques, and Andean music that it deserves as in the same line as other arts, as other, specifically Western arts, and this idea of progress, to have not only concurrent lines of progress and concurrent lines of development, technical development, but also to speculate what these shapes, what these sounds, what these technologies can be like now. So that was the perspective dimension that I didn't get the time to do it. But yeah, this is where I'm at right now in terms of my research. And I think that's it. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Mary. That was really great. So I kind of have one question I want to ask you both before we conclude things. So I noticed something common in both your lectures, which is this relationship between, or this distinction maybe between the modern and the pre-modern, or the modern, the indigenous. Also the like dissonance and resonance. I believe in Carl's case, it's something more like the sort of oceanic and the terrestrial. It's sort of, yes, that which is sort of firm and that which flows more. So I wanted to ask each of you individually to tell me how you think these dynamics sort of work in your individual lectures, and maybe if you have something to say about the other person's lecture, that would also be great.
Okay.
Yeah, feel free, Maria, if you want.
Carl,
Want to
you
take
wanna...
first? Sorry.
I'm sorry. We're a bit delayed right now.
Yeah. Maria, why don't you answer first if you have something to say, if you like?
I was about to say, like, could you repeat the question, just because I got a bit lost? But
I was saying that there just seems to be this relationship between, or distinction between, the modern and the pre-modern in your lecture. Also, the modern and the indigenous, the technological versus the non-technological. Also, you're quite concerned with the future and time and this sort of thing. So I wanted to ask you how you think these dynamics are sort of configured in your lecture.
Okay, this wasn't that much covered, but I think I mean, the answer I'm going to give. Basically, this project is part of a bigger sort of retelling from one part, or rather a different understanding of time. Because something that I find very problematic within this distinction between modern, pre-modern, indigenous, and the future is the element of nostalgia. And I didn't mention that, but there seems to be like this ghost there of is this a return? Is this a reimagination? And if this is our imagination, then why such why such emphasis, or what is actually like, if it is not nostalgia, then what is the mode of entering such spaces, such times, right? That is an answer for me, because the nostalgia for me is a very big trap. I'm not gonna say dangerous, it can actually be quite comfortable, but it's a big trap. So I guess that I'm trying to, and I hope to in the future, problematize even more what do we mean by modern here. Like, probably an objective, which is kind of crazy, would be to find what Huay tries to do, actually, too, because Huay tries to do this thing of posing again the question of technology in China by bringing back this relationship between Qi and Dao, and using that cosmological foundation to re-explain technology, or to reframe technology. I'm probably like want to do that too, because I think that allows us to dissipate this monolith of modernity, right? This idea of man with capital M, as proposed by Winter, and to sort of see through those ruptures what actually was what we were doing and what we are doing, right? Because I think that there is a lack of understanding of what we, I'm going to say like very bluntly, truly are as a historical subject, because the tools by which we have been given our way of historization have been very detrimental from the very start point. Like, we as subjects, we as post-colonial subjects, we as Peruvians, we as Andean people, although I have a bit of a conflicted relationship with me being identified as that, have already been put in a place, an object place, right? So it's very hard to even say whether what we are modern, we are pre-modern, do we need to be in that line of history? What does it serve us to be in such line of history, right? So, for example, I do want to go further with this idea of complementarity, because what happens if we have all of those things, both the things that we left in, were left in the dust, the culture pre-colonization, and what we have now. What happens if we entangle them? In what way does it have to be, or can be, like taking away this idea of
Maria, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt you again, because we're running out of time, and I need to give Carl just a quick shelter. So I'm very sorry. It's a tight schedule. Please forgive me. I'm very sorry. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I just got lost in the question, but yeah, basically that's my answer in progress again. Please, Carl, please say something.
Yeah, I would like to hear you elaborate on that at some point, because I'm quite. I think you're really onto something. I think just to be very, very brief. I guess basically, speaking from my own perspective, what sort of I tried to do here. Of course, I did. This was done in a quite sort of lighthearted style, but I think it kind of perhaps suggests how deeply and kind of a certain way of imagining and thinking about time and the past and something and its relationship to the future. How deeply ingrained it is, and perhaps I don't know how far this goes, but certainly it kind of exists by sort of the kind of Darwinian idea of the human being in my case, and the kind of there's a certain perhaps a way of thinking about time that is distinctively originates in kind of European modernity, which is quite malign, but it also seems to go very deep into these sort of very innocuous statements. Oh, I like swing like a monkey, and actually quite problematic. So if anything, I would perhaps that's maybe what I would add, sort of how deeply kind of pervasive this sort of temporality might actually be, and maybe mockery is also something that is required in kind of in relationship to it.
Okay. No, I see. Okay. Thank you very much, Carl. Fantastic. So thank you, Carl. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And that's it. Yeah. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, too.